Hello everyone, let me get my tea. Hope you're doing so well. I'm back again after taking a little tumble in December, had a little bunk on the head, got a concussion, also cut my chin open, which wasn't a good experience. Happy to be here, happy to be back. I am so excited that today I'm going to talk to you about my favourite books of 2022 along with my most disappointing, which I think will be very interesting, and there's maybe one in there that will anger people. We're going to get fully into it, but for now let's start with my top books of the year. I think there are 10 of them. First favourite book of the year is one that I haven't talked about very much because I read it before I came back to YouTube, and that was The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow. This is a book that I thought I would hate. My assumption was that it wouldn't be for me and I was going to hate every minute of it, but honestly this proved that I can enjoy fantasy still. This book I would definitely compare to books like The Night Circus. It's lush and rich and the writing is beautiful and it's transportive, and the story was slow but for me was incredibly satisfying. We're following a girl called January who is suddenly sucked into a world where magical doors exist that transport you to magical worlds. And again, when I heard about the plot, I was like, I don't know about that. But honestly, I absolutely fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the world, and it made me cry like a little baby. Loved every second of it. Highly recommend if you are into the kind of slow, whimsical, beautifully written tale. Next up, we have You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. We follow a woman called Faye who recently lost the love of her life in a car accident, and she's an artist and she is still grieving. She then obviously meets a man or two. Who's to say? We basically follow her as she grapples with the idea of falling in love again and trusting again and becoming vulnerable again in that way. I think it is so special. I think it's a really important book, honestly. The idea of falling in love again and finding a partner after such a traumatic loss, I think is something that I've never read about before in this way, and I just absolutely loved everything about it, and I'm very grateful that it exists. If you like a realistic, quite gritty take on falling in love after grief and loss, recommend. The next book comes with a bit of a note on it. So it's Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I read this for my Goodreads reading vlog. I actually said in that video that it was a 4.5 out of 5. That's not true, it's a lie. It's a 5-star book. I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was potentially mad. We follow Miri and Leah, who are a married couple. Leah is a deep sea exploration person. She works on a submarine. Horrifyingly, the submarine sinks and is stuck at the bottom of the ocean, and then she does return. The submarine is saved and she comes back, but their relationship is changed forever. And we basically follow their relationship sort of start to break down under the duress of Leah's experience and her just not being the same. Julia Armfield writes the most interesting, surreal, uncomfortable, unsettling, yet beautiful and comforting fiction I've ever come across. I cannot explain what her writing does to me, but I think she's just incredible. It is also, gonna say it, very weird. She even sort of goes into the idea of hauntings and sort of romanticizes it and makes it something really soft and really beautiful and tender. And I just love her. I love everything she does. I will read everything this author writes until I die. Now is a book that you will all be expecting if you watch me, and it's On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden. One of the best graphic novels of our time. I was so in love with this book. I actually vlogged it as well. I vlogged reading it if you want to watch the vlog. I do not have enough good things to say about this graphic novel. First up, let's just start with the obvious. The art style is absolutely ridiculous. It's so beautiful. She's so skilled. I also think you could unpack her choice of colours because it changes throughout the story. It's so interesting. I can't wait to read this again. I think that she is a genius. This was originally sold to me as a gay love story set in space, and it is that, but it's also so much more. So in the story, we're basically following Mia in a dual timeline. We see her join a boarding school, which is in space. Thank you. And then we also see her later on in her life join a troupe of weeple I was gonna say women and non-binary people who work to rebuild and restore broken down structures throughout the universe. It is so cool. Such an original idea. I found the story itself to be immensely satisfying and engaging, but the characters were enough for me to fully fall in love with this book. Like, I cannot explain what this graphic novel meant to me. The found family aspect was just so beautifully done, and I can't explain how much I want everyone to read this. It's epic, it's fun, it's beautiful, the characters will make your heart feel warm. What else can possibly be said? Next up, I have some non-fiction which I've seen on a lot of people's lists, and that is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jennette McCurdy. This is an account of Jennette McCurdy working as a child actress in Hollywood, growing up and suffering at the hands of an abusive mother and really coming to terms with that, suffering with her mental health as a result, and also talks about the exploitation that occurs within Hollywood. There's so much in this book to discuss. I'm going to put this down because it's shiny, but there is a lot to unpack in this book. She really goes into a lot. I think her writing is incredible, especially since she's writing about something so deeply vulnerable and upsetting. I think she does an incredible job. This book is definitely very hard to read at times, but at the same time, really, really incredible, and also just for me personally very fascinating. I love reading about people's experiences navigating Hollywood, so that for me it's just really interesting to read about, and she wrote about it really succinctly, and she's just a very wise woman, and I admire her a lot. So truly recommend this fully. Obviously reading the trigger warnings first. Changing tone completely, we have Carrie Soto Is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Taylor Jenkins Reid continues to rule my life. I love this book. It made me care so much about tennis. How the hell does she do that? I don't understand. In this book, we follow Carrie Soto, who returns to tennis to basically defend her title as winning the most Grand Slams? We follow a father and daughter relationship very closely in this book, and it is so heartwarming, so genuine, so believable. I absolutely love the dynamic. Also just really enjoyed that it wasn't a perfect relationship by any means, and they are both very flawed people, but the way that the author explored that, I just thought was so beautiful, and it's such a tender story about the two of them. I don't think I've rooted so deeply for a character in like a really long time. Like, my heart was racing. I was sweating. Carrie Soto is a fantastic, refreshing character to read from. She's not in any way a people pleaser. She literally only cares about success and winning, and that's a perspective that I really enjoyed reading from. I feel like I haven't read from that kind of character in a very long time. 100% deserved in my top books of the year. Next is Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellows. This is another book that I just completely fell head over heels in love with. We follow Cleo and Frank, who meet in New York City and fall in love and get married, I think within 6 months, so that Cleo can remain in New York with him and they start a life together. And then we basically witness the breakdown and disintegration of their relationship due to many factors. We basically get to see how a relationship can suffer due to things like mental health issues and addiction and many other things. You also get to read from the perspective of Cleo and Frank's family and friends and how their relationship impacts their lives, and it's just totally fascinating, and I love how the author pulled off this idea. A lot of the characters in this book are very flawed indeed. Don't care though. Absolutely loved this book. When we're talking about books where we're looking at the complexities of a romantic relationship and how it can break down or flourish and thrive, I'm there, I'm on board, I want to read it. Okay, we're on to the top 3. So my number 3 is Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. I think I've talked about this a good couple of times on my channel. In this book, which is very short by the way, we follow a young black man living in London and he meets a girl. There is a love story in here, but there is a lot more to it than that. The author discusses vulnerability and how the main character is so strongly affected by being perceived as a young black man living in London specifically. And there's also discussions on mental health and of course love. May I also add that there is music discussed in this book, like specific albums, and can I please recommend that you listen to them while you read it, because the reading experience was just like unmatched. We have my favourite romance book of the year, which is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Wow, I am still processing this book. In this book we follow August, who is living in New York City when she meets Jane on the metro, but Jane, there's a little secret about Jane. There's something going on with Jane. There is a weird little supernatural plot in this book that I really didn't think I was gonna like, but it ended up really working for me. and I was very surprised about it. There is something about this book. It's like it cast a voodoo love spell on me. I don't understand how this book is so good. The journey that we see August go on this book is genuinely just one of the highlights of my life. It was so entirely wonderful, and this book is like the perfect example of how it feels to find people and relationships that make you feel seen and loved and safe. It's perfect. I have no notes. Number 2 book of the year. We've made it to my number 1 book of the year. It is Beautiful World, Where Are You? By Sally Rooney. In this book we follow 4 young people, 2 pairs essentially. One is a new connection of the romantic variety, and the other is a long-term friendship. They've been friends for a very long time, but there's definitely like a romantic tension there. I almost feel like this book is a study of these 2 very different romantic relationships. It also closely examines the friendship between Alice and Eileen, and they are fascinating smart women. And we see them write emails to each other in between every chapter of this book, discussing some sort of topic. It really goes all over the place. Sally Rooney dives into a lot in this book. I think in particular there is one chapter where I think Alice is writing to Eileen about the idea of experiencing beauty in the world and always wanting to renew that sense of awe and experiencing beauty and joy, and how that most of the time relates to being with your loved ones. So stunning. I love this book so entirely. I think this book is also a bit of a love letter to literature about love and friendship and what an enormous role it plays in our lives. This book toes the line between being beautiful with stunning writing while also being just completely interesting, very fascinating. Like I said earlier, I love reading about complex but realistic relationships. And it feels like we get the privilege of like poking our nose into 2 real couples' lives. And that's my favourite thing. So there we have my favourite books of the year. As I said, I'm also going to dive into my most disappointing books of the read, which I'm going to preface with the fact that I don't think these books are bad, they were just disappointing for me personally. So anyway, number 1 we have here, and it's The Houseguest by Amparo Davila. I read this in a horror 24-hour readathon that I did recently, which was translated by Audrey Harris and Matthew Gleeson. This is described as a book of horror short stories, but I would describe it as more of a strange, slightly surreal short story collection. There's just sort of like a dreamlike quality, which I normally really enjoy, but for me, in this, it just really didn't work. This collection was somehow very uneven in tone, but at the same time, very repetitive in the way that the stories were structured. So I didn't really understand what was going on, but at the same time, they were all very predictable because they kind of ended in a similar way or with a similar structure or movement. Honestly, it just really didn't work for me. I found all the characters to be very similar to each other and not very interesting. I felt very uninvested with every character in this. I think I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 because I can recognise that this isn't a bad book, and I don't think the writing is terrible, but the stories themselves, as they are, just don't work for me. I think probably my worst book of the year was Social Creature by Tara Isabella Burton. This was sold as kind of like a tie between You and Gossip Girl. We follow a woman who meets a like wealthy, highly regarded woman living in New York. You know, she's got loads of money, she wears nice clothes, she lives in an incredible flat, and she kind of like infiltrates her life, and it becomes like sort of a thriller type of situation. Very strange book to explain. It's a strange one because the author did kind of come through with her promises for the book and everything that was described, but not in a good way and not in a satisfying way. I think both the writing and the characterization were just very confusing and inconsistent, and I don't think it was very well done. I found myself almost sort of laughing along by the end because I just didn't believe anything that was happening. It got so, not shocking, but just almost kind of silly to a point. I was like, I don't think I care anymore. Purely just a book that did not work for me. I think I gave this, I think I gave it 2 stars, but it's more of a 1 star if I'm being totally honest. The next book, I'm scared to discuss. Hear me out, but it is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. I I read this in my recent romance reading vlog as well, so all of my thoughts are in that video. This is a fantasy romance novel following Nesta and Cassian, and I can't be bothered to go into what it's about because I didn't even find it that interesting. So I'm going to start with what I did like. I really enjoyed Nesta's relationships with Emery and Gwen and how their connections grew and how they bonded so closely. I thought that was beautiful. Definitely the best thing about the book for me. The rest of it, I think what really killed this book for me was my contempt for the subplot and all of the side characters. What the hell was that about? Absolutely hideous stuff. Rhys used to be hot in my eyes and now he's gross, 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 gross. Every move he made, everything he said in this book annoyed me. Hated it. Horrible behaviour, unacceptable. So basically the subplot and everybody involved really just sort of killed my love for them. And I have to be honest about that. I thought it was executed horribly. Because I loved ACOMAF. I think A Court of Mist and Fury is such a good fantasy romance book. But now, I don't know if I see it in the same way. When it comes to the romance itself between Nesta and Cassian, I just thought it was quite good at points. I didn't love them, partly because I struggle to love characters like Nesta, which again I talk more about in my reading vlog. I also thought it was way too long. That also just kind of made me bored and wish it was all over. So overall, I did give this book 5 stars. No, I didn't give it 5 stars. So I did give this book 3 stars. I thought some elements of it were really well done, but when it comes to the romance itself, I just didn't care. And that is that on ACOSF. Next is The Piano Room by Cleo Valenza. I read this for a Goodreads reading vlog. Again, I really didn't enjoy this, unfortunately. This is a classic example of a book that I just never would have read if it weren't for that video, and it was bad luck. It really was not written for me. This was a gothic retelling of the tale of Faust, and it's set in Hungary, I do believe. I was not the audience for it, therefore I did not enjoy it at all. I also generally found it to be so boring, genuinely disliked most of the characters and didn't find the writing to be great. So I don't think this book was particularly well done in the first place, but it also had the curse of me not being the audience for it. So take this with a pinch of salt, but I really did not enjoy it at all. I was so happy when it was over. Oh my gosh, I felt like I'd run a marathon. My last disappointing book was The Atlas Six by Olivier Blake. This was so disappointing. I read the first chapter for free on my Kindle. I really enjoyed it and I thought it was going to be one of the best books of my life. I feel like I was promised an enemies to lovers storyline, and then I bought the hardback and then I read it and I was like, I don't like it. I thought this was going to be so excellent. It started with such promise and then it just got really convoluted and confusing. And there was way too much double crossing and backstabbing to an extent where I didn't root for anybody because I just didn't like them. Raina, criminally underused. Where the hell was she? She was one of the most interesting characters. The writing was a little bit fussy for me, and also I just found that the idea was so good and this book could have been so good, but the execution of it just really left me wanting, and I was really, really sad about it. Definitely mostly down to the characters and how they interacted with each other. I just found by the end really boring and I didn't care about it anymore. So I will not be picking up the sequel to this. And that is all of the best and worst books of this year. Do me a favour and let me know what your favourite book of this year was, like your top book. Try to force yourself to pick one. I would really love to know because I've asked this in the past on one of my old top books of the year video and I got so many recommendations, and let me tell you, I read a lot of them and they became my favourites, so you guys have really good taste and I really appreciate you letting me know. Thank you so much for spending time with me, us. Farewell. Would you like to say goodbye? Oh god, it just keeps going. My god, are you alright? See you next time, goodbye.